In the summer of 1347, the air in Europe did not smell like death at all. It was peaceful. It smelled of blooming lilies, sun-drenched hay, and the promise of a golden harvest. But far to the east, on the Black Sea shores, a dark shadow was awakening from its slumber. It traveled in the dark, silent holds of merchant ships, moving across the great vast sea. Inside those ships, between bags of silk, the executioner was waiting to strike in the dark. Not a man with an axe, but a creature so small it was invisible to the naked human eye. It lived in the gut of a flea, hidden in the fur of a common, unassuming black rat. The year of our Lord, 1347, the great dying was about to start its long, painful march. 12 galleys arrived in Sicily, carrying a heavy cargo of unimaginable pain and horror. When the port of Messina opened its gates, it welcomed its own horrible, slow demise. The sailors were already dead or dying, with black swellings on their necks and groins. They were so weak they could not even lower the heavy anchors of dark, aged wood. From the port of Messina, the sickness spread like fire in a pile of dry autumn straw. It did not discriminate between the rich man and the humble beggar in the common mud. The bacteria was efficient, silent, and faster than any horse in all of the great land. Within days, the first victims felt a sudden, burning fever in their own red blood. Then came the buboes, painful lumps that turned the skin into the color of black coal. Doctors wore simple cloth masks and herbs, but they were masks of absolute despair. They believed the bad air, the miasma, was the source of all the human rot. They did not know the flea was the true assassin hiding in the dark, a true killer. By 1348, the plague had reached the great city of Florence. The crown of the world became a massive grave. People fled to the countryside in terror, but they carried the invisible death with them in their blood. Families locked themselves inside their homes, but the silence from within was the worst sign of the end. The economy collapsed quickly. Gold meant nothing to anyone when there was no bread left in the markets. Ships were left to rot in the harbors, their sails tattered like ghosts under the pale and sickly moon. Agriculture stopped completely. The fields were left to the wild weeds and the cold, relentless autumn rain. The church, once the anchor of the soul, could not explain the horror or save the holy from the dark rot. Priests died in their confessionals, their prayers left unfinished as the air turned cold and stagnant. Neighbors turned on each other in fear as suspicion bloomed in every dark corner and narrow alleyway. The smell of vinegar and herbs filled the air, a useless shield against the power of the Black Death. Pits were dug outside the city walls, where the nameless and the forgotten were thrown in the dark. No bells rang for the dead anymore. The silence of the city was deafening to those who still breathed. The social order broke completely. Kings and peasants died in the same cold bed of the great pestilence. Faith was tested to the limit, as the heavens remained silent and the earth turned into a field of rot. Every cough was a death sentence. Every touch a potential kill in a world where love had become a threat. The streets of London were narrow paths of filth, where the sickness moved faster than the Thames water. Art changed forever, now obsessed with the dance of the macabre and the triumph of death over the living. The world was ending, or so it seemed to those few who survived, to see the sun rise over the dead towns. The flagellants walked the roads, whipping themselves in public, for a mercy that God refused to grant. They thought their own blood could wash away the sins of a dying world that was drowning in its own rot. But the blood only brought more flies and more death to the small villages that were already forgotten. Jews were blamed for the plague, accused of poisoning the local wells in a wave of ignorance and terror. Persecution became a new infection, born from the absolute terror of a people who had lost all hope. In the midst of the horror, some chose to live as if it were the end, drinking wine in the empty halls. Banquets were held in cold, empty halls, with wine flowing like salt water over the floors of the elite. Money lost its value. A horse was worth less than a single onion in the cold markets of a dying continent. Mothers abandoned their children, and brothers forgot their own siblings in the race for a final survival. Charity died first. Survival was the only law left in the plague, as the scent of burning bodies rose up. Pyres blazed in the night, a hellish light against the black sky, where the nameless were finally consumed. No one sang songs anymore. The music of the world had gone mute, replaced by the sound of the winter wind. The plague was not a war of swords, but a war of the unseen, attacking the very hope of all of humanity. By 1349, the pestilence crossed the cold waters to reach England, where thousands died in a few weeks. London was a trap of wood and mud, where the towers stood silent, a stone giant over a dead, rotting city. In the Nordic lands, the frost could not stop the fever. No corner of the earth was safe from the march. The fields were silent, save for the sound of crows feasting on the dead, as manors crumbled into the mud. The feudal system was bleeding out. Labor was now a luxury, as a single serf was worth more than a title. Peasants demanded higher wages, or they would let the harvests rot away in the fields of the angry lords. The church faced its own crisis of faith. God had not saved the holy from the rot of the great sickness. Survivors began to question the old ways, the old books, and the old gods that had failed them so deeply. Life became a dance with death, a constant reminder of how thin the line is between the light and dark. The Danse Macabre appeared on every wall, skeletons dancing with the kings and the beggars in the mud. Every meal was a miracle, every sunrise a victory against the Black Death that had consumed the world. By 1351, the worst was over, but the world was unrecognizable now. 1/3 of all Europe was gone. The survivors inherited a broken land, but one with new possibilities and a different future for all. Wages rose as the supply of men fell. The middle class was being born from the ashes of the old world. The Renaissance was still far off, but the seeds were planted in the blood and pain of the year 1350. Science and medicine began a slow crawl out of the darkness, moving from magic to cold observation. We survived the Black Death, but we were never the same. Our spirit was forged in a new, dark fire. But history is a cycle of trials. Centuries later, a new shadow would rise from the distant east. The fire of a forgotten giant was about to turn the sun into a ghost, and the summer into ice.